Give me a few more seconds. It's streaming right now. It's preparing. We should be there just in a few seconds. We are live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. 4.1, reconvene in open session. I need a motion and a second. Moved by Mr. Bonds, second by Mr. Mraz. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. 4.2, report out of closed session. There is none. We'll go to 5.1, Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Arrayes, would you lead us?
Ready, salute.
Pledge
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the
republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Six 6.1, invocation. Please bow your heads if you're so inclined. We come to you, Lord, very uncertain about the world around us. We ask you for guidance, strength, wisdom, and patience. We ask you for peace and blessings for ourselves, our staff, our students, and our community as we navigate through these times. In your name we pray, amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
If you give me just 1 minute, I am having some difficulty with my viewing. And now it's gone completely. Page, can I get a full screen back and not see the agenda? I have a paper agenda right here with me, but I can't see everyone. So how can I get rid of thank you. That is so almost back to normal. Okay, thank you very much. 7.1, public concerns will be heard by the board at this time. However, they will not be discussed. Policy number 9323 limits individuals' presentation to 3 minutes. The president may extend the time under certain circumstances. This is the opportunity for members of the public to focus on issues important to the district's purpose of education. Under board policy, this time may not be used to present derogatory information of a personal nature on any employee. So I ask all of you to please bear with me. I have 15 letters that have been submitted and or phone calls that have been transcribed from members of the public. Number 1, Yolanda Alvarez. In regards to distance learning, would it be possible for kids to do distance learning in an application such as Zoom or any other where the teacher is transmitting her or his class live? It would be like if they were in class, but every kid would be home. Yolanda Alvarez. Number 2, and I apologize if I butcher your last name, Kimberly Holupka. Good morning. My question deals with IEP and 504 plan students. How are you going to help these kids with identified learning disabilities and learning curves that distant learning will be harder for them? Thank you. Number 3 is from Sandra Powers. I am a mother of 3 daughters, a senior, a freshman, and a 4th grader. I have struggled through distance learning, and there were a lot of tears, both from my 4th grader and myself, but we managed. I'm writing to you today to express my support for an in-classroom return to school for all my girls, because I am fearful of what will happen if they don't return to class. Recently, at a doctor's appointment for a sports physical, one of my daughters proceeded to break down and cry with the doctor expressing her sadness. This child was always happy, but during this isolation, she has become depressed and angry. My youngest has not been sleeping well, although her sisters seem to sleep all day. I am fearful for their mental, spiritual, and emotional health. So much so that I have begun research into possible private school options where they can return to a classroom environment if they are not allowed to here. I know that there are those who are more afraid to send their children back to school, but with the distance learning option, their concerns have been addressed. Hopefully the safe return to school plan can address my concerns. Thank you for taking the time to hear my concerns, Sandra Powers. Risa Lerma. Good morning. I am a mother of 3 daughters. One will be a junior and twins that will be entering 6th grade. My children have struggled with distance learning. My oldest has always carried 4.0 or higher GPA, and she says she just doesn't feel she can do distance learning. The math, along with her AP classes, are too hard to do online. This worries me as she has goals of a higher education. My twins really struggled, and it is almost impossible for them to do distance learning. My husband and I have to work. It is pretty much impossible to homeschool our children and work, and it's not the responsibility of my oldest to have to be my younger children's teacher and babysitter. I will have no choice but to look into transferring my kids to a district that will have in-person classes if DPOL votes for distance learning. This is not something I want to do, but my children's education and mental state is what matters here. It is not healthy for children to stay home and be on a computer all day. Teachers are essential workers and should have to do their job just like every other essential worker does. We all take risks by just going to the grocery store or gas station. If 80% of parents want their children to go back to school, then that's what it should be. For those parents that want distance learning, let them. I believe keeping children home is doing more harm than the virus itself. I hope the board does the right thing and lets our children go back to school and get the education they deserve. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my concerns. Risa Lerma. My name is Rose Jordan, and I am a 3rd grade teacher at Marks Elementary. In March, when we were told that school would be closing immediately, I was devastated. In order to do the best for students, I embraced distance learning. During this time, I also learned a lot. I missed each and every one of my students. I kept in contact with them through Google Classroom, as well as holding Zoom meetings. During the summer, I have been excited at the thought of returning back to school. I have worked in my classroom preparing for the start of the new year. I truly believe that the classroom is the best learning environment for all students. Within the last week, I began to have reservations about returning to school. My concern is regarding the safety of the students and staff at this time. The number of COVID cases have gone up in our community as well as the state. Scientists and doctors are warning that things may be worse during the fall season. I feel that in order to be successful with reopening of schools, we should start slowly and monitor what is happening with the virus. It would be a disservice to the students and parents to jump into reopening to possibly turn around and shut down school again. Therefore, I believe it would be best to start the school year with distance learning and monitor the case numbers, our community and county regularly. Based on those numbers, we can modify whatever plan we're on to make sure we are providing the safest and most effective learning environment for our students and staff. Rose Gonzalez Mora, hello. Here are some of my questions that I have for today's board meeting. Number one, what are the plans to maintain 6 feet social distancing in the classroom? Number two, how would you address the situation if someone tests positive for COVID-19? Number three, what will your screening process and protocols for teachers and students when they arrive at school every morning? I would like to thank you for addressing my questions. We need to make sure that it is safe for our teachers and students to return back to school. Their health and safety should be first. Thank you. Linda Cones, hello. I apologize, Lisa. My name is Lisa Cones and I have 2 sons who attend DPE. One is going into 2nd grade and my other son will be going into kindergarten. My concern is if our district decides to move forward with only distance learning in the fall, how am I going to be able to teach my kindergarten child how to read and write sentences? Kindergarten is an important grade. That's when children learn the basics to read and write. A 5-year-old's attention span is very short to be in front of a computer screen trying to pay attention to the teacher when there are several other children speaking on the Zoom call all at once. It will not work. Distance learning is no way for a child to learn adequately. Thankfully, my oldest son already knows how to read above his grade level, but what about the children going into kinder who haven't learned these skills yet? They will go into 1st grade behind and not knowing how to read. I am very concerned about this. Parents should have the right to choose if they want their child to be at school in person. Sincerely, Lisa Combs. Manuela Verduzco. Hi, I read about how we can email our comments, concerns about the meeting for reopening schools. I think parents could send the children to school or choose distance learning. I hope schools do open up. The children need their teachers and friends. Children need socialization from each other. We aren't 3, 5, or 6 grade teachers, etc. Our children need their teachers. Online is not the same. The children want to go back. Together we can take precautions and be safe. It takes a community. We can do it. If we take precautions and work together, we will be okay. Let's not let our children fall behind. Thank you for your time. Dear Dos Palace or Loma Joint Unified School District School Board, I would like to begin by thanking you for your time and thoughtful consideration regarding our district's reopening plan. The decisions that will be made are not taken lightly, and I believe that you have the best interest of the Dos Palace community at heart. First and foremost, teachers want to be in their classrooms with students. We know that being in the classroom is the best place for learning to take place. I believe that one of the main responsibilities of teachers and staff in our schools is to keep children safe. Right now, it is not safe for students and staff to be at school. Putting all politics aside, there is so much contradictory information out there, it is hard to filter through it all. What we do know is that COVID-19 is new, and even the experts do not yet fully understand what the long-term effects of the virus are. We do know that the infection and hospitalization rates have been and currently are climbing at an alarming rate. We are hearing mixed messages when it comes to infection rates among children and their ability to transmit the virus among their peers and to adults. Children have not been together in large groups since school shut down in March. There is so much that we cannot be certain about with this virus, and this is not the time to conduct a science experiment with our children, their families, and our staff members' lives. Reopening our schools in August would be irresponsible at best. Please delay the opening of in-person classes at our schools. We can continue to monitor the spread of the virus and open when it is safer to do so. If the decision to delay the reopening of in-person classes can be made immediately, then teachers can focus on creating a meaningful distance learning program before the August 11th start date. There is no decision that will please everyone in the community, but delaying the start of in-person classes will protect the health of our students, their families, and our school staff. Thank you for your time. Linda Nichols, teacher, Bryant Middle School and Dos Palace High School. Elizabeth Meraz Fonseca. I am a mother of 2 children, my son who recently graduated this year and a daughter going into her sophomore year. My son struggled through distance learning to the point where I had to take a leave of absence from my employment to stay at home. My son is diagnosed with depression and generalized anxiety. Distance learning became a perfect environment for my son to remain in his room and lose interest in participating in any activities. This is one of the reasons why I am in support of students returning to school. My profession is a mental health clinician in the crisis unit for the areas of Dos Palace and Las Vegas. Since the closures of the schools, I have evaluated several students ranging from the age of 10 to 18 years old admitted to the hospital for danger to self. I have observed many students displaying aggressive outbursts, severe depression symptoms, isolation, excessive sleeping, lack of interest in activities, psychotic episodes, suicidal ideations, and paranoia thoughts. Most of these students have no history of mental illness, but since this pandemic, their behaviors have changed drastically. My daughter is a student athlete who plays sports year-round. For the past few months, she has participated in softball practices with her teammates and played in several softball games against other teams. It is for this reason that my daughter is in good health physically and mentally. Students are in desperate need of returning back to school, as this pandemic has mainly affected these students mentally. I understand other parents' concerns, which is also why I support the plan, including parents having the option to enroll their children in distance learning. I hope the district will keep that option, as each family has their own story and circumstances. Thank you, Liz. Good evening, my name is Teresa Straub. I am the president of the Weaver Teachers Association. Tonight, I am here to encourage the Dos Palace Board and Superintendent to reopen the district with 100% distance learning. Since the school closure in March, educators have been working on how do we return to school. Weaver Union created a district task force with admin, board members, certificated, classified, transportation, food services, and parents. The #1 priority, safety for the staff and students. With the reopening guidelines from the Merced County Public Health Department, the Weaver Union District Task Force was encouraged and hopeful that in-person classroom normality with added protocols would begin in August. I myself, being a 3rd grade teacher, was in favor of returning to the classroom in person. I have missed my students, my routine, and my colleagues. But as the positivity rate of COVID cases increased in Merced County and more restrictions were deemed by the state, my mindset began to shift. Last week, my mindset was solidified with a conversation with a certificated member. She stated to me that she had taken this closure time to, and I quote, get her affairs in order. She had updated her trust, her will, and life insurance policy. Wow. I never thought I would be having a conversation about reopening schools that discuss the possibility of death for a teacher. While we should be talking about lesson plans, safety protocols, and flexible seating, it made me realize that starting the new school year in person was too much of a risk for all students and staff. After many, many Zooms, texts, and emails, I am happy to announce that Weaver Union School District has made the plan to start the school year with 100% distance learning. In 4 months, I have finally had a good night's sleep. Why? Because now we have a direct plan, a plan that involves the well-being of our students, our staff, and our schools. I encourage the Dos Palace Board and Superintendent to begin the school year with 100% distance learning. The students and staff are the most important priority in district. Thank you for your time. Teresa, Weaver Teacher Association President. Valentina Hernandez. I have my daughter in special ed. How would that work? I also have a son in independent studies. How would that work out? Voice message by Vita Jacobo. I just wanted to ask how it is possible that you will be opening schools when the governor has closed everything down. I mean, if everything is closed, then the schools should be closed too. Parent name, Emerald Sanchez. 1, would hybrid learning 2 to 3 days in person and the rest online ever be an option? 2, what is the plan if we do in person when flu cold season hits? The symptoms of COVID-19 are so vague and could be anything. If our child or kids in the classroom start coughing or sneezing, get running nose like they always do come November, what is the protocol you are implementing? Do we keep them home until they test for COVID or until their symptoms are gone? At that time, can they switch to online learning so they aren't missing anything in school? 3, do we have options to switch to online learning at any time? If we choose in person and not like the format or just become uncomfortable, is that an option? June 14th, 2020, DPOL School Board, Maria Davis, President, members of the board. Good evening. My name is Doug Hendricks. I'm a retired teacher in the DPOL district, having served as a science teacher at Dos Palace High School for 26 years. During my tenure, I had the honor and pleasure of teaching 4 of you, and teaching with another member of the board for my entire career here at Dos Palace. I think you know my credentials. I am writing this letter because I'm quite concerned with what I have heard may happen with the opening of schools here in Dos Palace. COVID-19 is a serious, deadly disease, and we must all work together to get it under control. Some schools are thinking of opening in-person school, which is a huge mistake at this time. We do not have this virus under control at all. 1 month ago, according to the Merced County Health Department, we had 6 confirmed cases of COVID-19 here in Dos Palace. I just looked on the County Health Department website and we have 57 cases now. That is a 950% increase in cases and growing exponentially. We are not close to having it under control. This poses a serious threat to the health and lives of our students, staff, and teachers. You are mandated as school board members to provide a safe and healthy environment for our students, staff, and teachers. The following information to be brought to your attention. We need to use 2 things to guide us through this: science and facts. We cannot let politics, personal opinion, or the economy influence our decisions. Only science and facts, period. When you turn on the news, you hear comments that children don't seem to be infected as much. What does that mean? Do children get COVID-19? Yes, they do. That is a fact. We don't know how many because of 2 facts. Children are rarely tested, and we know that not all people develop symptoms. We just don't know this because it's a new virus. Things that we thought were true proved to be untrue. We thought masks didn't make a difference. Now we know that was wrong and that masks do make a difference. The CDC says so. I believe that the CDC is the best source we have for information. We should follow all of their guidelines in opening. Children do get infected. We have a duty to protect them, every single one of them. We must take every precaution possible and go slowly. Our school is not just children. A school is made up of adults too, teachers and staff. Our schools have many of them and we need to protect them too. They are more likely to be infected due to the way this virus acts. How can we ask them to come to school unless we know it's safe? We can't. No one should be asked to risk a deadly infection by teaching or working in person unless it's safe, especially when teaching can be done with distance learning. There are lots of stories and complaints about how distance learning is not good. That is simply not true. It can be, but has to be implemented correctly. There has to be consequences. Grades need to be assigned for work done. Grading should not be any different than what it was before the virus. What we did last spring was not a fair measure of the ability of learning to take place because there were no consequences for not doing the work. No wonder it didn't work. Distance learning can work, but it takes a student doing the work and handing it in for a grade. It takes a teacher who teaches and uses methods that will get the information needed to the student. It takes a principal who will make sure that teachers are doing their jobs and they know they will be held accountable. It takes a superintendent who will hold his principals accountable to see that learning is going on every hour in every class every day. And it will take a school board who will provide the materials and supplies necessary for everyone to do their jobs. It will take a school board with courage to do the right thing, to not put one person in danger, to use only science and facts to make their decisions. The board must leave politics out of this, make decisions that always make the health and safety of everyone involved the only factor in their decision. When I read the guidelines for opening of schools provided by Merced County, I was appalled to read that social distancing was only 3 feet, not the 6 feet that the CDC says. Why would they do that? I think it's because they want schools to put as many kids in a class as they can for financial reasons. Is saving money worth anyone's life? We had 2 students who died while I was a teacher at Dos Palace High School. It was devastating to me and everyone else. There were only 2 days in my 37 years as a teacher that I did not want to go to work, and both of them were the day after the students lost their lives. I can't imagine the board putting any one of our students or staff in a position to lose their life. I am afraid that if we don't follow the CDC guidelines when we open our schools for in-person attendance, we will have deaths. That will be horrible. Now I would like to give you my input on what I feel is the best way forward. First of all, we will get through this. The virus will be beaten and we will get it under control. I suggest that we make the decision now to go all virtual school for the first 9 weeks. That will give us time to see what is happening around us. Is the virus under control? If it is, then we can open up slowly. We can adjust the schedule, go to some type of hybrid schedule, but only under safe conditions. Safe conditions are social distancing of 6 feet, minimum spacing between students' desks, and every person at school wear a mask all the time. If you can't wear a mask, you must stay on distance learning. No school can open for in-person school until there are no new COVID-19 cases in the Dos Palace community for 14 consecutive days. The board shall reevaluate the type of school offered every 9 weeks. Distance learning must be a choice that is available for the entire year. We must be prepared for distance learning. The board needs to provide computers and hotspots for every student and family. The superintendent must let the board know what is needed and supervise the principals. The principals must hold all teachers accountable. This is a great opportunity for them to know what is going on in every classroom. It will all be online. We have counselors and vice principals who will now have time to assist in helping teachers be better. Teachers must do their part. They should be allowed to work from home as long as they have adequate internet connectivity. If they don't, then they will need to come to work from school. Finally, students and parents need to do their part. They need to know what to expect. Parents need to go the extra mile. It is not going to be convenient, nor is it going to be easy. But if we all work together and help each other, we can and will do this. I want to leave you with the message that every life is valuable. The virus is exploding in the United States and California because we did not do the right thing. The state says that we cannot have services indoors nor eat in a restaurant, yet some are advocating for in-person school. That is a recipe for disaster. We must not do this. Do not send any person into an unsafe situation. Now is the time for everyone to dig and do their best. Work together. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to express my feelings. Doug Hendricks. That's all I have. Mr. Padilla, I believe that you wanted to speak.
Yes, I did, Mrs. Davis. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Sergio Padilla, president of the Dos Palace Loma Teachers Association. Before I begin, I want to preface this statement by saying that I wrote it prior to receiving news of the governor's intent to make an announcement tomorrow on schools reopening. In the event that that decision is left to this board, please hear my words. Tonight, you will be hearing the district's plan to reopen the schools of Dos Palace, put together through a collaborative process that I was proud to be a part of, with the goal being to have students return to campus safely. Today, I feel that is no longer possible. As we watch positivity rates, active cases, and number of deaths all continue to rise, one thing is abundantly clear: the COVID situation is not improving. We began planning for our return with the idea that the situation was and would improve. However, in the past month, our county has seen COVID cases increase over 400% and the number of deaths nearly double. Locally, we have seen our case count skyrocket from 10 to 57 cases. And this is with schools not being in session. As a lifelong resident of Dos Palace, its well-being is always on my mind. As a resident, I can't imagine opening potential hotspots. As a teacher, I worry about one of my students becoming infected. As president, I cannot look my fellow members in the face and ask them to risk their well-being. As a parent, I can't imagine risking my own daughter's health and wellness. She's starting kindergarten. I understand the needs and concerns of all these groups, and I'm aware of the role our schools play when it comes to supporting working families, enriching the lives of our students, and providing a welcoming and safe environment. At this moment, circumstances beyond our collective control do not allow for us to do that. After consulting with teachers across the district and representatives from each of our school sites, it is in the opinion of myself and the Dos Palace or Loma Teachers Association that we delay the start of in-class instruction until such a time that we can ensure the safety of our students, staff, and community. A lot of assumptions have been made about how COVID affects children, but here's what we do know. It has not been the children who have been out working, out protesting, out to bars and restaurants, or out to get groceries. Our kids have largely been sheltering in place for the last 4 months. There is no reliable data as to what happens when children are placed on the front line of exposure. I don't want to find out what happens when a class full of kids gets COVID. Whose conscience is that going to fall on? Who is going to be able to look those families in the eyes and offer thoughts and prayers? Whether we like it or not, in this moment, we are living through history, and we have to ask ourselves, how do you want history to judge you? If I'm judged for being irrationally cautious, then so be it. The plan we have is a good plan, a plan we should implement when conditions improve. But right now, the district should immediately pivot and begin planning for providing a robust, enriching, and safe online environment for our students. On March 16th, we all saw what teachers could do on 1 day's notice. Imagine what they can do with 3 weeks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Adoption of routine consent items. 8.1, the consent calendar represents routine items acted upon in one motion by a roll call vote. The recommendation is for adoption unless otherwise specified. Any item can be removed upon request. Contracts, agreements, and proposals. 8.2, MCOE, Contract for Business Services Department, Information Technology. 8.3, CPM Mathematics Curriculum. 8.4, Small School Districts Association. 8.5, School Services of California Incorporated Agreement for Special Services, Fiscal Budget Services. 8.6, Rosetta Stone Language Learning Software. 8.7, Imagine Learning Contract. 8.8, Illuminate Contract. 8.9, Area Student Information System. 8.10, Summer 2020 E-Waste List. 8.11, Renaissance Learning Contract. 8.12, Contract and Overnight Trip for Bryant Middle School, Camp Green Meadows Fish Camp. Minutes. 8.13, Board Meeting Minutes of 6/18, Regular Board Meeting. 6/24, Special Board Meeting. 6/30, Special Board Meeting, and 7/6, Special Board Meeting, and 8.14, Warrants and Payroll. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
By Mr. Bonds, second by Mr. O'Banion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. And it carries. 9.1, Superintendent Contract. I need a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Chase,
Second.
second by Mr.
Second.
Mraz. Dr. Miller is receiving a salary increase as required by his contract of employment to $186,629. He is also receiving an additional year on his contract through June 30th, 2023. All other terms and conditions of employment will be the same. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And it carries. 9.2, Safe Return to School Plan 2020-2021. Dr. Miller?
I'm going to turn it over to Lalo. First, before I turn it over to Lalo, or Mr. Lopez, I wanted to kind of reiterate, I know Mr. Padilla talked about the process that we went through as a district with principals, district office staff, teachers, collaborating with transportation department, collaborating with all the different departments throughout the district. Because when you reopen schools and all the different, we have an A plan, a B plan, and a C plan, and Mr. Lopez will kind of go through that. There's a lot of dialogue that takes place, and so I think that our group that we put together, did a great job working together, collaborating together, and it's I'm just, like I said, excited that the group that they put together that was able to put the plans together. And so the collaboration took place. And so anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lopez, and I'm going to let him talk about the plans. And then I'll follow up a little bit after that. So Mr. Lopez. I should say before.
Yes,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
O'Banion?
Do we need a motion, Dottie?
Yeah, we need a motion and a
I'd like
second.
to make the motion on this first.
Thank you, Jeremy. Moved by Mr. O'Banion,
Second.
second by Ms. Mraz. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Motion
carried.
Wait a
I'm
second. Are
sorry.
we voting?
Why did I apologize. I apologize to the community. We are a little bit crazy.
Aye.
Everything's a little bit crazy. Mr. Lopez, go please.
Well, thank you, Board President Davis, members of the board, Superintendent Miller, and members of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. And I second the comment from Dr. Miller. I'm really thankful to both of our associations, CSEA and CTA, because they played a pivotal, very important role in us trying to problem solve, trying to prepare the best that we can in situations that are constantly changing, conditions that are constantly changing. So the plan that I'm going to present to you was developed again collaboratively. And let me share my screen so then I can go over the presentation with you. All right, so we call this the Safe Return to School Plan, and there are a number of components to it. One of the things that we decided to do, and also it's part of the requirements from the state, guidance from the county, is that we need to provide distance learning. So our thought is for us to give options to parents, for them to decide what is best for their child, looking at their family situation and making that personal decision. So with that, we started with the option of providing a distance learning. And in addition to that, we also plan for the possibility of offering in-person learning. So one of the things that we did, and we started this process back in May, early June, but one of the things that we did, knowing that we were gonna provide distance learning, is that we sent a survey out to our community to figure out what was the interest out there in terms of if they had to make a decision, either distance learning or in-person learning. And as we analyzed the first survey that we sent out, the numbers came in as 20% of the respondents saying that they will have their kids attend distance learning. So with that information, we send out a second survey, or actually it will be a commitment or a consent that the parents will give us to enroll their kids in the distance learning program. So as this morning, in looking at those numbers, 435 students, 435 or 19% of the parents who responded to that consent contract, if you will, stated that they were committed to the distance learning option. And that was as of this morning. The assumption is that the rest of these folks, 81% of the of our students, they are either waiting to see the what the in-person learning is going to look like for them to make a decision, or they may have other reasons why they haven't responded, or they feel comfortable enough with sending their kids back to school. And you can read that in many ways. But what I know so far is that 435 of our parents have already decided to pursue the distance learning option. And they will have until July 24th. That's what we have a deadline for that, for them to turn in that consent to us, or give us the consent. So the other option that we have is in-person learning. And in order for us to be able to do that, is we need to make significant changes in our day-to-day practice at school in order for us to ensure the health of our students and of our staff. So it will, even though it will be in person, it will not be as what we have in memory of what we have done. It's going to be way different if the board decides to go that route. So that's part of the one of the components of this plan, is to give parents that option for them to decide based on their families' reality. So a little bit about the distant learning option, and it's going to be very familiar. The parents, the students are familiar with it, the teachers as well. Is basically kids learning from home and teachers providing instruction from in a virtual environment. The expectations will be the same, the kids doing the work, but there will be obviously no physical contact of any kind. Is whatever contact occurs is going to be online or via phone or other measures, but is not in person. That's kind of the definition of that distance learning. In terms of the instructional program for the distance learning, which I know we're going to have to offer because 400 plus our students already consented, or our parents consented for us to do that. The instructional program is going to be standards-based, meaning that all the standards that the state requires of us for all those core curriculum, that's what we're going to be teaching to. The learning plan is going to be collaboratively developed by teachers, by grade level teams, by departments. We are going to have common assessments to evaluate students' learning. There will be reteaching and enrichment opportunities for those kids. And aside from the formal online lessons, there will be office hours where the teachers will be reaching out to the kids, to the parents, to provide them support. Our district will be responsible to provide books and hotspots, Wi-Fi, and so on. And we already have a plan to do that. Mr. Lee and his department has done a phenomenal job in preparing us for this eventuality, and also the work that they did in the spring. So the instructional program, the expectation in terms of what the kids are expected to learn that does not change. Here's a sample weekly schedule. It will vary, depends on what level are we talking about, elementary, middle school, high school. But this is something that we created in the spring semester, or the last 3 months of the spring, and we're going to be implementing something similar. Distance learning 2.0. So I call it that because I think from lessons learned or new state requirements, there have been some changes in terms of what is expected of us as professionals to do as we deliver instruction. And this time, as opposed to the spring semester, attendance will count, or daily participation. So the site or the teachers or The district is going to be responsible to make sure the kids are logging in, that they are engaged in the learning. And in the previous time, we were not required to do that. Another change is the assignments that are given to the kids are going to be monitored, that the kids will be expected to complete the work. This whole notion, this whole idea of holding kids harmless, that's no longer in effect. So kids will be held accountable. We are going to be held accountable to making sure the kids are actually following through with the work that they are supposed to be doing. The other change is that we are required to establish frequent communication with parents to discuss the progress the students are making. The profession itself, I mean, teachers, they do that. That is something that I know that our staff does, but this is one of the expectations that has been communicated from the state, that we are going to be establishing a process in which we following up with the parents and the kids to make sure that they're making academic progress. And also we have to make sure that we have a plan to address the need of unduplicated students. So these are English learners, kids with IEPs, or populations that need additional support from us in order for them to make academic progress. So distance learning will look different this time around. And I think that will give some peace of mind to some of our parents that have already committed to pursuing this option. Now, the in-person learning option, we had to establish a planning a process to be able to account for all the recommendations from the Merced County Office of Ed, Merced County Health Department, from the state, taking into account the needs of our students, the needs of our staff. And here is the part where the CSEA, the two associations, they are incredible partners, because they came at it with the attitude of let's figure out what we can do in order for us to make this happen and protect our staff and provide a education for our kids. So both associations were involved throughout this process. Principals held multiple meetings with their staff to so they can provide input and so on. So I'm very thankful to them for that. So the expectations as we embark in the process was for us to identify and implement safety measures that will ensure the social distancing expectations, and making sure that we are providing the personal protective equipment to staff and students. And the idea is that we will take responsibility, making sure that our staff and our students are provided what is required if we pursue this route. The other expectation is that we are going to create student cohorts that will remain together throughout the day and develop a school-wide staggering schedule for instructional, transportation, recreation activities, and so on. And the other guiding expectation here was the idea of establishing a working group at the district level, at the site level, that will meet frequently and respond to what I call unknowns, because with this particular pandemic, there are a number of things that we don't know. So there are things that we, based on experience, we know we need to do, but there are a lot of unknowns. So even if we bring these kids, we will not have a plan that will address all the potential issues that may come up. So that's why we need to have a working group that will meet and problem solve whenever we run into some issues that we did not think about. So those were the expectations going into the planning sessions. In terms of the guiding principles, one of the things that we knew is that we needed to plan and we needed to anticipate possibilities. And the best way to do that is through a collaboratively process. And therefore, again, like I stated earlier, we needed to involve teachers and site leadership and district leadership, solicit feedback and communicate. The other guiding principle is that once we develop a collaborative plan, then folks will be committed. Folks will do what is necessary or what the plan calls for. And I think that we'll take the that responsibility to make sure that what the plan is implemented. And the other guiding principle is to prepare for the unknown, or to establish a working group that will address those things. So in order for us to do this in-person learning, flexibility is necessary from all of us, from parents, from all of us. And the other thing that will be critical is sacrifice. And you will see why I say sacrifice, because there are a lot of things that we all have to do that will be different than what we are accustomed to, in order for us to make this in-person learning a possibility. So with that, I'm going to touch on certain things that to highlight, but the specificity as to what exactly is going to happen at each of the sites and so on, I think we submitted those documents that are part of the board packet. But I'm going to highlight some things. When I talk about sacrifice, you know, there are some changes that we need to make in order for us to address the social distancing, the staggering of students, and so on. Yep. So adaptation, flexibility, and sacrifice. Those are the things that we will need to do. So the bell schedule adaptation, and this is was done through a discussion with the CTA, with teachers. If we are going to do this, then the bell schedule is going to change. So we're talking about instruction starting at 7:40 a.m. at the Dos Palos Elementary, and be done by 1:10 p.m. Marks Elementary will start 7:40 and be done at 1:30 p.m. So that will allow us to only to provide more time for teachers for planning, and to also address the staggering part of this, or having cohorts of students, and limiting the student interaction in terms of physical closeness. For Bryan Middle School, it will start later, an hour later. We're proposing starting at 8:55 and be done by 2:55, and then having blocks rather than periods, and having 6 period blocks that are going to be rotating by week. Then the high school also will be a change there, 9 to 3. And George Christian 8:30 to 2:30. So the instructional time will be less, but we do have that flexibility based from the state guidelines, that they are they change those expectations in terms of instructional time if we are going to do the in-person learning. So that is a change. The other change is going to be in transportation. So in order for us to ensure that social distancing, all the other requirements, the bus pickup is going to be first elementary. So the run is going to be from 5:45 to 7:35, giving us time to start at 7:40. And we're going to utilize 10 of our buses to do that. So we drop off all of our elementary kids, then we go and do the pick up the secondary kids, and drop those kids off by 8:45, and we're going to be using 13 buses. We already looked at the logistics of this. Actually, the transportation department, Mr. McCulloch and his team, I think they made over 800 calls to parents to find out if they were planning to do the distance learning model, or having their kids come back to school. So just there's a lot of work that happened behind the scenes for us to say that this schedule is possible. And you can see there the drop off as well is gonna change to what we currently have. So there is going to be, it's gonna look different in order for us to abide by the recommendations from the county and from the state. So other school procedures to highlight here, and again, it's going to look different depending on the school. Schools will be closed to the public. Parents, obviously, or guardians can still stop and pick up their kids. There will be one entry point. Staff will be given options to wear face masks or face shields during class time. And the specificities of this, is impossible for me to answer every single possibility or questions about the logistics or the procedure, but we do have those policies and procedures that we uploaded for each of the sites that will answer the specific questions from parents. And again, those things were developed with input from staff and the association. So in regards to what the options of the board are, we can do the in-person learning. And again, back to the consent from parents, 400 plus of our parents already selected the distance learning. So that is something that we are going to do. The other option is for us to start in-person learning, and we haven't heard from that 80% that haven't made that decision. So those folks may decide to go the distance learning model, which we can accommodate. Or if the board decides for us to go in the in-person learning, we can also accommodate that, but that's up to the board. If we do the in-person learning model, there is going to be a plan B, plan C. So if we start in person and the state decides for us to do the hybrid model, then we can transition and doing a A-B schedule and having those kids show up to school for some days and then do the work via distance learning. So those are the options. We can either start in-person learning or distance learning. And then transition. We can also do the other option of starting the distance learning 100%. And as the situation circumstances change, we can transition to a hybrid model, or we can transition to from there transition to an in-person learning model. So I think based on the quality of folks, quality of staff that we have, their capacity, their goodwill, their flexibility. I strongly believe that we can make that transition, and we can do what the board decides. We can do the distance model, learning model, a combination, or whatever the decision is. Again, I feel very comfortable with implementing what the board decides to do based on the track record of our staff. I think we should be able to do whatever the decision.
Thank you, Lalo.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Miller.
No, I just wanted to add that, just kind of some updated information, as the time has passed, I know the CDC, and it was mentioned in public comment that the CDC has 6 feet. Merced County Health Department, a couple of months ago, or maybe even a month or a half ago, something like that, they came out with 2 to 3 feet in classrooms, cohorted, making sure students were cohorted. And now, as of this morning, the goalpost has moved, and now it's 3 to 6 feet instead of 2 to 3 feet, and no more than before you could have 25 to 30 kids in a classroom, and now it's 10 to 12 feet, or excuse me, 10 to 12 students in a classroom. And so, it's one of those things where I can't say enough about Lalo Lopez and the principals and CSEA and CTA bargaining groups. Their collaborative process has been fantastic to be able to present the 3 different models. And the 3 different models, in person, that model is as safe as we possibly can be with students coming back on campus. The hybrid model is, again, the safest model as a hybrid model. And then the distance learning is the model that, like I said, again, that we came off with. I believe it's improved, and we can even improve it even more. And so it's one of those things where, the initial in-person model as of this morning no longer works. The hybrid model actually no longer works right now. And we'd have to go back and create a model where instead of half the kids coming on campus, it'll be a third of the kids coming on campus, because we have high school classes that have 35 kids, and if the max is 12, then now you can't do 50-50, a A-B model of half on, half off as a hybrid model. Now it's 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 of in-class instruction, and everybody wearing masks and things like that. And the other thing is that it was masks for grades 6 through 12, and K-5 it's recommended. Now there, as of this morning, or excuse me, yesterday, it's mask 3 through 12. And it seems like things are getting more and more stringent as the cases increase. And so, I just wanted to, like I said, kind of explain, where we came from as we left the spring, all the work that's been put in. I mean, there's been really no time off with the amount of Zoom meetings and collaboration time that people have put in. It's been utterly outstanding. I can't say it more than that. I am so proud of the work that people have done to be able to present the 3 options and the detail that goes into those options based on the information that we have. And so, again, it's things can change tomorrow. I know there's different announcements being made and things like that. But I just wanted to, like I said, kind of paint a picture of how things have changed, and they continue to change, and they'll probably change tomorrow. And so I just wanted to, like I said, again, leave you guys with that as you ponder your decision.
Are there any questions for Mr. Lopez or Dr. Miller?
So just to clarify, what you're saying is basically at this time, the county health will not rubber stamp options 1 or 2, the in-person or the hybrid plans that we've put together, correct?
No, they will not. And it would need to be a situation where we would need to go, I wouldn't say go back to the drawing board, but we would need to create a model where it was thirds, basically, where you'd have not just an A and a B group, but an A, B, and a C group, going throughout the week. So A would come Monday, B would come Tuesday, C would come, and you can see how it could get really difficult to keep track of kids and time, and
And that model would consist of distant learning as well.
Correct.
Yeah, it would be distant.
Yeah, you'd still have to, kids would definitely have to work, at least, I'd say 2 to 3 days a week, they'd still be at home 2 to 3 days a week because of the limit to 10 to 12 students in a classroom. And so, so that would, like I said, again, inhibit that model from taking place. And so we would have to go back and like I said, the hybrid model would need to be modified to even water down even more.
But just to clarify, the hybrid model still has that contingent that of parents who opt their children for pure distance learning, they could still do that if we had the hybrid model, correct?
Correct. That's still an option throughout all. I mean, if they're distance learning, all kids are distance learning, but through the 100% in person or the hybrid model, that's still an option to opt into distance learning. Correct.
Then we also, as Mr. Lopez had presented these options kind of in a progression, especially on the last slide where it was started with the distance learning and then moving to a hybrid and moving to a in-person, or is that kind of the thought process there?
Yeah, it's one of those things where he talked about being prepared, and Mr. Lopez is very prepared, and coming to this school year, we wanted to have a variety of options for the community to look at and school board members to look at to make a decision. And so all of those options, and so like, let's say for instance, the numbers go down, and they talked about 14 days of no new cases or all of those little different things that we can discuss on how you would reopen. Those are some of the part of the conversations to say, okay, well, like you said, gauge it in 9 weeks, or every board meeting, data can be presented and we can discuss options for, the upcoming time frame, or based on, like I said, the information that we have based on cases and increase, decrease, all of those things that we get presented with. It's going to be, and this is part of that conversation right now. It's just we're not in session yet, but it's regardless of when, let's say when a vaccine comes out, in January, or whenever it comes out, and everybody can get a vaccine. Well, then we can look at our options again, and what are the options that we have? What are the plans that we have in place? Which model do we feel we want to move to? That's why I feel so proud that what's been done by staff, because they've put a lot of work into the plans, and not necessarily thinking about, I want this model or I want that model. They're just looking at it as, okay, if we did this, this is what we would need to do for this model. If we did the hybrid model, this is what it would need to look like, safety measure wise, and things like that, based on what the health department's saying, what CDC's saying, and things like that. And then again, what distance learning would look like. And again, the distance learning piece, that kind of got sprung on us, and it was a lot of the things were happening in motion or on the fly. It was a pretty fluid situation, and it's still a fluid situation. But again, I think that some of the things that Mr. Lopez presented and some of the dialogue that we've had, as far as supports for teachers, supports for administrators, students, it would be a different situation moving forward.
Dr. Miller, if we were to choose a plan, could it change in the middle of the school year at any time? Let's say we were to start off with plan C, and then we evaluate later on, missing every 30 days, and we find it's safe to open up school, then we can transition into plan B and slowly work our way into full schooling. Is that something that's possible to do?
Yes, and that's kind of what the idea was, based on, like I said, again, data, information, cases, things like that, and being prepared for any situation, and being able to be prepared to roll into any dynamic, whether it's in person, distance, or hybrid. And so exactly what you just said right now, we have the ability to do all three.
But at this moment, plan A and plan B are off the table due to the decision that the public health department made.
Correct.
Mr. Lopez, I had a question, because you made a comment that going back to school is not going to look the same, just because there's been a lot of comments about the kids, and obviously we all know the best place for them is classroom. So when we look at that, what, from a social aspect, does it look like? I am assuming, from what we know from the health department and the regulations, restrictions, recess isn't going to look the same. Lunch isn't going to look the same. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's one of the arguments that is being made about going back to in-person learning, is that social learning, because we are social creatures, and with this limitations that we will have in in-person learning, there's not going to be much of that, and just kind of socializing is just a natural instinct. But now we are going to be we're going to be policing kids, like, you can't be this close, or you can't. So I am not sure what, teacher will make it work, but I don't see what the benefit is in terms of instruction, because one of the most effective ways of engaging kids is when there is interaction and there is collaboration and cooperation and learning together. So if we do this in-person learning with the limitations, I don't see how that is going to be possible. So that's what I meant when I said that it's not going to look, or we're not going to have that advantage of what comes natural to kids, which is socializing and collaborating and learning together, because there's going to be quite a limitation. And frankly, if I can add, that collaboration could happen in a distance learning environment because we are, I will say, fortunate where we are with technology. It does allow, especially with kids, they are very knowledgeable in terms of how they use technology. So that part of it, the collaboration, I think that's in a distance learning environment, we can do that.
And to kind of add on to what Mr. Lopez said and kind of answer your question, Mrs. Davis. Also, all teachers, while they're in class, everybody's gonna have a mask on. And all of desks, it's not gonna be a collaborative, kind of what Mr. Lopez discussed. With Common Core, there's a lot of student-based discussions and facilitation by teachers and things like that. And with the circumstances, all desks need to be pointed the same direction, and students aren't to necessarily look at each other and interact. And desks have to be 6 feet away from each other. And it's just a very different dynamic that does not lend itself to what we've come to know as far as the transition to Common Core, what classrooms look like nowadays in comparison to 10 years ago. It's going to look probably 15 years ago with a third of the students in the class at one time. So,
Doc or Gordon?
Yeah, just for the public too. So what happens if we go against the county's recommendation? If we were to open up and go against the recommendation, what would that do to the district? Would that put us liable? What would that set us up for? Just to answer some questions.
Great point. Yeah, if we go against the health department, we are on the hook. Our insurance company does not cover anything that we don't abide by with just the health professionals of the county. And so if we do not follow along with what the guidance is by Merced County Department of Public Health, if we don't follow that, and we just go against that and just kind of do our own thing, the district is liable, and we do not have any kind of coverage for any kind of COVID related matter that the district would assume all liability.
What about for our parents and what about for our students that want to come back and the parents sign a waiver, a legal waiver, and the teachers that want to come back, they sign a waiver that saying they won't hold the district liable if that does happen, because you can't even prove that they do get COVID from school. They could have got it somewhere else.
Exactly, and there's really no waiver that you have. It's the district's responsibility to protect people from themselves sometimes, and this is one of those situations.
Okay.
Dr. Miller, if we were to start school regularly, could the governor shut us down at any point and leave us scrambling to issue laptops and hotspots once again?
Just like he did last time, yes.
And we would be scrambling, kids would lose valuable education.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the situation that we were in the spring, if you recall. And I was amazed at what our technology department and just our staff in general could turn around, how fast we did. But it wasn't ideal, and the output, the end result wasn't ideal also. There was good education taking place and things like that, but just there was no preparation time. And so that's what sets people up for failure sometimes, just the failure to prepare because you don't have the time to do it. And so, a lot of this stuff, we have staff development at the beginning of the school year. We have staff development during the year. There's, staff development times. It's added into each weekly calendar, weekly schedule to each school site of about an hour and a half each week for staff to come together and things like that. There was none of that. It was, hey, everybody's going distance learning, in a week or two. And there was no prep time. There was no, hey, I'm a teacher, let me get lesson plans together to prepare to do distance learning, to do Zoom and that style of education. And it just, like I said, it was just difficult to And I think that our district responded extremely well. I'm extremely proud of what took place under the circumstances, but again, just not ideal and not what was best for kids, that was for sure.
This go around, your grade will be exactly what you earned. You turn in the work, you will be graded. You start off and you will have to work hard to keep your grade, correct?
Yeah, and that was the thing, is that if you recall, the Mr. Lopez touched on this in his presentation, was the fact that you know, the state basically came out and said, we're going to hold students harmless to their grade, because they kind of understood the circumstances that they were in and the staff and things like that. They could only improve their grade, they couldn't hurt their grade based on the quarter grade. But now that we have time to prepare, and students have been through this, staff has been through this, the work that they complete, the work that they're assigned, they'll need to complete, they'll need to turn in, they'll need to be graded, just like they would in the traditional model.
Will there be extra support to our students? Will there be our teachers' age? Will there be extra help? Will there be phone calls made checking up on these kids if we did go distance learning?
Yeah, and I think that that's probably the biggest piece that I think maybe was missed. And I wouldn't say missed, but difficult to prepare for, because we were so focused on instructional materials and getting technology out, and did everybody have a technology, but just also the ability to now prepare and say, hey, you know what, we're gonna make sure that these kids are being met with by all staff members, and there's going to be regular contact and all of those things, and some documented materials that we can put together to be able to document, you know, what kind of check-ins and what kind of support students have received, because again, that's our job. And if you know, there's an instructional aid for a special population of students, and that instructional aid will be a part working alongside with the teacher virtually to be able to provide support to the students.
If
Dr.
we would,
Miller, and speaking about support and those key people, will we be able to provide for the parents as well as the kids? I need to call and talk to a counselor. We're struggling with this, whether it's academically, emotionally. You know, we see a lot of kids throughout the year that come to the nurse's office. Can we make sure that these people are available so that these things that we struggle with while we're there, we are still struggling with even when we can't physically be there, that we can still provide counseling and assistance physically, mentally, and academically and otherwise for our kids and our parents?
And I think going back to Mr. Board Member Mraz's point of time to prepare, because what can happen, and I know that our emotional support team that we have, as far as counselors and school psychologists, behavioral health clinician, things like that, those folks, those folks reached out, and there was, you know, documented time that was made to students and things like that. But I think that we'll be able to front load documents and information out to, so, okay, if you're a Dos Palace High School student, if you need to talk to a counselor about college, here's the phone number, here is the address, here's the email address. If you need emotional support, social emotional support, here is the contact person for the school psychologist. They'll have resources available. They'll be able to you know, do what they're trained to do and be able to support kids social emotionally. And then also just across the board, just like I said, again, being able to front load information and time to plan as far as coordination, documentation of services that are being done, and then also front loading the information out to the community of what resources not only are available on campus, but what's also available virtually.
Dr. Miller, if we went full distance learning, would this negatively impact any jobs to our current staff members?
Currently, no. As far as current staff members, no. You know,
department be hurt or anything? Would they?
No.
Jobs?
All of the staff is still needed. I mean, everybody has a role to play still, even though we are virtual. So like I said, there's a lot of things that, a lot of support that's still needed, even though students wouldn't be in their desks per se.
Jobs could change a bit, but they would still have their job.
Yeah, and I think that's like I said, we've had a great relationship with both bargaining units, and it's more of, how do we make this work, and let's put our heads together and discuss it and things like that, rather than not trying to create a plan or come together to make a decision. So I think that is definitely the goal. And like I said, there's a lot of support, a lot of things that need to get done and be able, like I said, to support kids and things like that. And like I said, we're still going to need to feed the students. I mean, our food service staff has been utterly phenomenal. I can't say enough about Rhonda and her group, her team that she has. They've done a fantastic job, and those services still need to go on. And so there's a lot of aspects of the district that, although virtual, everybody has a role to play.
Mr. O'Banion, you made the original motion and it was seconded by Mr. Mraz. So if it is your choice, if you'd like, you need to amend your motion so that we know if we are voting on A, B, or C, basically.
I'd like to amend my motion to vote on opening the school year full distance learning and reevaluating the COVID situation in the very near future as to possibly opening up school when we can.
Do you second that, Mr. Mraz?
Yes, simple vote A, B, or C, correct? Is what
No,
we're saying?
let's not use ABC. Let's stick with just the actual, in-person, hybrid, or distance learning.
Okay.
That way we're more specific.
Mr. O'Banion has amended his motion to opening up school completely distance learning. Is that correct, Mr. O'Banion? Do you second that amendment, Mr. Mraz?
To open up schools full distance learning?
Yes, that is his amended motion. Do you second that?
I second it.
Okay. So then if there's no more discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arias,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth.
Yes.
You're on mute, Mr. Van Worth.
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion,
Yes.
Mr. Bonds,
No.
and Mrs. Davis is a yes, and it passes. .3, create and hire distance learning. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Mraz. Second by Mr. Van Worth. Dr.
So-
Miller?
So with I know we just you guys voted to move into distance learning to start the school year. However, if we were to move into a hybrid model or move into a in-person model, we would need to have internal candidates for the distance learning program for parents that may or may not opt to into that program. So this is basically a job description in collaboration with Mr. Padilla, the Dpol president, that Mr. Lopez and the bargaining unit helped create. And this is basically a distance learning teacher for when we open school back up.
Are there, Mr. Bonds?
Don't we have enough teachers to distance learn? Do we really need to hire somebody else?
No, we wouldn't be hiring anybody else. It would be internal candidates when we move to in-person instruction. So currently, we're going to be distance learning. So we don't need to hire this position. But when we do in-person learning or hybrid model, there may be parents that still have that option to do distance learning. So when we get there, this job description would allow us to hire an internal candidate to be able to facilitate distance learning while in-person learning is taking place on school sites.
So it's not a new, it's a current employee.
Yeah, it would be internal candidates only. Because there's going to be a reduction of the number of students in classrooms. So you'll need less teachers, but there'll be an increase in the number of students doing distance learning per se when we do open school. And so you would need to be able to hire internal candidates for that specific position.
So would this would kind of be a modern day answer, like an independent study teacher position, something like that.
Similar, but it would be basically the distance learning model.
Sure.
While students are in school.
But it would be a single teacher that might cover different grades.
Correct. Yeah, correct. It'd be different grades, but it would also be a situation where, like, if we move into in-person and there's a vaccine and we don't need to have distance learning anymore, then this position just kind of goes away. And then we would maintain the current independent study staff that we have.
The hybrid model couldn't exist without distance learning teachers, correct?
Correct.
We have to have distance learning teachers to have a hybrid model.
Correct.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Miller? Okay. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arrayes, was that a yes, Mrs. Arrayes?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion,
Yes.
Mr. Bonds,
Yes.
and Mrs. Davis is a yes as well, and it passes. 9.4, 2020-21 Single Plan for Student Achievement for Dos Palace Elementary, Marks Elementary, Bryant Middle School, Dos Palace High School, Westside High School, and Westside Community Day Middle High. I need a motion and
So moved.
moved by Mr. Mraz, second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller?
Yeah, so these are the single plan for student achievement at each school site for the 2021 school year. These are a required plan to receive Title I funding, and they basically line out how Title I funds are spent at each school site for students that are below grade level on English and math, and so they're also aligned with the LCAP. So.
Okay, are there any questions for Dr. Miller? Okay, call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arrayes,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion,
Yes.
Mr. Bonds,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis is a yes as well, and it passes. 9.5, 2020-21 student handbooks. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second.
second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller.
So these are the annual handbooks prior to school starting. There has been one change, and you'll see that on action item 9.19. The athletic handbook has been updated with the student athlete contract. That's the change that will be in the Dos Palace High School handbook. And so there's a little modification in the handbook. Outside of that, everything else is, there's no changes.
Any questions or concerns?
Did we align the high school and Bryant handbooks in any way?
Yeah, so the discipline committee that met last year, that we put in place the basically the non-privilege status, and basically putting a definition in there with what non-privilege is, and then also consequences as far as non-privilege based on out of school suspension, 1 to 2 days being 2 weeks of non-privilege, 3 to 4 days being 3 weeks, and 5 days being 4 weeks of non-privilege. Then also the consequences associated with drug and alcohol and tobacco violations. All of those items are in there that committee created, and those are aligned together.
Sorry, one more question. Sorry, in the high school handbook versus the athletics handbook that we'll have on 9.19, I noticed that there's a difference in some of the verbiage. In the high school handbook, most of it says the student must attend half the day for X, Y, or Z to occur, and the other says 4 of 7 periods or something like that. Is there a way we can tighten that up and make it consistent?
Yeah, so that's the issue is that based on feedback from the school board members and having dialogue over a significant amount of time period, there's been changes to that, and we have not been able to, and some of that stuff is very recent. Some of the changes were very recent, and so we weren't able to upload the handbook in time based on vacations and things like that of a few people. And so that basically the contract on 9.19, or the coach's parent, the student athlete and coach's athletic handbook will basically replace on 9.19 what's there in the handbook. So that's the update to it. And like I said, it was very recent. Some of the stuff was as of yesterday. And so I apologize for that, but that basically on 9.19 would take the place of what's in the content of the handbook as it is right now.
My point is that there's outside of that section, there are other places in the student handbook that reference half the day must be, attended to attend events, etc., to have the privileges, etc. Could those points be, we tightened up and aligned?
Absolutely. Those are definitely items that obviously are typos that we'll need to go back and fix. So
there's verbiage, Dr. Miller, in both of the contracts that we're referencing as far as handbooks, and then also the athletic handbook. There's ineligible and non-privilege. Can you explain to me what, with regard to how they're stated in these contracts, what ineligible is versus non-privilege?
So non-privilege is basically a disciplinary infraction. and you're basically placed on non-privilege for a disciplinary infraction. And so, or attendance. And so if there's a disciplinary issue or an attendance issue, if you have a lot of unexcused absences, then you can be placed on non-privilege, which means that you, until you get those things fixed, then you would come off of non-privilege. Like say you get suspended, you get on non-privilege, you can't go to any school events. For if you get suspended one day, then you can't go to school events for 2 weeks. And so again, it's discipline and academic and attendance related. The other piece of it, as far as ineligibility is an academic consequence. So at each quarter, a student needs to maintain a 2.0 and no more than 2 Fs. And if you go beyond that, you're allowed, as it states in the athletic contract in 9.19, it basically states that if the student extinguishes or exhausts their 2 probationary periods, then they would eventually go on non-privilege, or not, excuse me, ineligibility. They'll be ineligible during that time frame until the next quarter. If they were to get 3 Fs or fall below a 2.0 or whatever. And then at each grading period, they would be able to be reassessed, and that would be the responsibility of the athletic director.
Question. Dr. Miller, how did we come up with the 2 probationary periods? In the past, you could have up to 8. Now it's only you could have 2. I would have thought that an even ground would have been maybe 4. I don't have a problem with the 2F, but this is a change in procedure, and there's a lot of high schools around us that have 2.0 and the exact same grading policy we have now.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I know there's through the high school grading period, if you don't count you only count the 3 quarters, because their last quarter of their senior year doesn't count because it's their final grade. So there's basically 4 each year and 3 their senior year. So that's basically 15 quarters that they're going to. So that's basically, if you said 8, that basically half the quarters they can fall below a 2.0 and more than 2 Fs and still play basically half their career at high school. And again, the goal was to when we reviewed the athletic contract, it's not a finished document. There's a lot of work that's been put into it, but a lot of it's been evaluating other districts. And there's a neighboring district that only has 1 probationary period. And so, there's the 4, there's a potential of 3. We kind of came to the discussion that I had with Mrs. Crivelli and Mrs. Lalandis. We kind of came to a conclusion of 2. That's what we were looking for. And then again, trying to raise expectations and to maintain a 2.0 and no more than 2 Fs. That's not necessarily a very high bar, and still giving them 2 probationary periods we thought were fair. But I do understand your point of going from 8, which is a lot, to 4 to 2 is not that much. But we felt that more than 2 Fs and lower than a 2.0 is
Clovis Unified. When Clovis Unified and Fresno Unified, they had the exact same grading policy we have now. And I just think that we're just trying to really make it tough on a lot of kids that are marginal students.
Well, I think also if you raise expectations, students usually meet them, and that's, I think, where there's going to impact kids. Absolutely, there's going to be situations where and this is going to be something fresh for all kids. We're not going to go back 2 years and implement this new policy on a junior. It'd basically be starting fresh with all kids in high school, and that way everybody would be aware of the new policy and things like that. But again, this is up for discussion, and if the board would like to have 4 probationary periods instead of 2 or 3, we're all ears.
Will we can we offer like academic counseling to students that are behind?
Say again?
Can we offer some type of academic counseling and special services to help bring these grades up and allowing the RFs? Let's say, hey, let's just work on tutoring. Let's get you some tutoring. Let's get you some help. Let's bring them up. Let's not.
And that's accessible to all students. All students would have access to academic counselor and other options as far as support and things like that.
Will these students be allowed to practice, do the same thing as we did with our drug and alcohol programs? They'll be able to practice.
Yeah, and that was some kind of deep dialogue with Mrs. Lalandis and Mrs. Crivelli about the fact that the most important thing is keeping kids connected. And while kids are ineligible, they cannot play. They can practice, but they can't be at the game. They can't necessarily be on the sideline or in the dugout or whatever on the any sideline at a basketball game or whatever. But they can practice. They can still be a part of a team. They still need to work on their grades if they ever want to play. Let's say mid-season, at the quarter of their season, whatever their season is, they become eligible. Now they can help their team, and they've been practicing the whole time. If we don't allow them to practice, then even when they become eligible, they're not going to be ready to play and help their team because they're not going to be in shape and just flat out not be a part of the team. And so that was part of the discussion is that, yeah, they deserve a punishment because and I wouldn't say a punishment, but a consequence because they're ineligible. So they shouldn't necessarily be a part of game day. But to allow our kids to be connected to an event, a sport of some kind, whether it's, FFA, a club, band, or whatever it is, allowing them the opportunity to practice, but not necessarily perform in the event.
I would like to see us. I'd like to see us come up with some kind of a study table for those kids that are on probation and ineligible, and they can meet once a week and have somebody that would monitor them, and it wouldn't cost very much money to do that. I think that would be a good investment for those kids, and I think it would get a lot of those kids off of probation and really help them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because I know that part of the athletic director's responsibility, and with Irene not teaching 2 periods next year, being a full-time AD, those are some of the things that Mrs. Alliance can dedicate her time to is monitoring grades of athletes, and making sure, checking in with teachers, making coaches aware, and just being kind of a point person for some of the academic things that students need, not just compliance officer with some of the physicals and some of the other things, but kind of the whole student athlete, if you will. And then, like you said, also I know a lot of our teachers do a lot of tutoring after school, but maybe we can set something up to where, there's a specific teacher each day that can help any student that wants tutoring after school. And we can set up something like that, like 2 or 3 days a week, whether it's, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever. And we can, like you said, kind of coordinate days, and it'll be extra pay for extra duties and things like that. But like you said, Mr. Van Werth, it'd be money well spent.
So if we vote on these handbooks right now, I mean, how do we do that?
How about this? I think the athletic piece of it, the athletic contract, let's leave that to the side because we'll address that at 9.19. But the rest of the handbook is intact. But we will, excluding the coach's athletic contract, student hand contract. We'll address that at, like I said, 9.19.
Okay.
Maria, you're on mute. Ms. Davis.
I apologize.
No worries.
All right.
In these handbooks, does the same apply with regard to alcohol, drug, and tobacco and vaping?
Yeah, so and part of the contract, if you look, again, 9.19, it's has more of the information associated with with that. It has the actual drug and alcohol and tobacco policy in there, and it defines non-privilege, just like it actually is in the handbook also, but it's in the athletic contract on 9.19. And again, it wasn't able to be updated in the handbook per se, because, and again, you know, the handbook is the handbook, and you know, there's a lot of work done on it to kind of update it. But again, we didn't get this final copy of the athletic contract into it prior to today's board meeting. And like I said, again, we apologize for that.
So when we vote on these handbooks, the high school handbook, we're not voting on that grading policy, or is that grading policy included in the handbook? So we vote yes, that we're saying we support that policy as written, yes or no?
So for the athletic contract, as far as the athletic side of it, like I said, we're going to remove that from the handbooks right now. That is separate at 9.19, and that action item on 9.19 would basically replace the athletic piece of the Dos Palace High School handbook. So.
Got it. Okay, good. Okay, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
So just to be clear on what you just said, you're removing the athletic piece from the handbook?
From the handbook as it sits right now, because again, the handbook was not updated with the athletic contract that was recently added to the board agenda. So we can, if you guys would like, we can table the handbooks and update it and make it, you know, what we agree to with the athletic handbook after tonight, or we can revise and come back and have another look at it, or we can approve it as is and make a note that basically not approving the athletic contract information in the handbook, and we'll address that at 9.19.
I think that's a bad idea, because we have a lot of time before we're going to have athletics again, you know, so I would think that tabling the athletic part of it and the eligibility part of that piece would be a good thing to do right now.
Mr. Bonds?
Can I make a motion to table it?
The original motion would need to be amended, and the second would need to be, this person in second would need to agree to the amendment. So.
I believe that was me who made the motion.
Correct.
Daniel. I'm fine with tabling it if we need more time.
The motion was made by you, Mr. Mraz, and it was seconded by Mr. Chase.
Mr. Mraz, what was your motion?
I motion.
What?
I amend my motion to table.
Okay, Mr. Chase?
I will second.
Okay. Are there any more questions or comments? Okay. Mr. Mraz? Call for the vote. Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Arias? I'll come back to Mrs. Arias. Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion?
Yes.
Mr. Bonds? Mr. Bonds?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis is a yes. Mrs. Arias? Can I at least get a thumbs up to table or a thumbs down?
There we
Okay.
go. Thumbs up.
Yes.
And it passes to table. 9.6 LCAP Federal
Yes.
Addendum Plan. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second,
second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Array.
So basically the federal addendum is basically a supplement to the LCAP. And it basically, again, it kind of allocates ESSA funding for students. It's, like I said, geared towards supplemental services for students, for unduplicated students. So.
Yes.
I got you, Lisa.
Can you hear me?
I
Yes.
got you. Thank you. Are there any questions for Dr. Are there any questions for Dr. Miller on 9.6? Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
yes.
Mr. O'Banion,
Yes.
Mr. Bonds. Thank you. Mrs. Davis is a yes. Mrs. Arrayes, yes or no?
Holy mackerel.
All right, there you go.
And it passes. 9.7 Adoption March 2020 Policy Updates. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz, second by Mr. O'Banion. Dr. Miller.
Yes, these are just the board policies that keep the district compliant. They're just updates that we receive.
Okay, are there any questions?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arrayes,
Mhm.
thank you. Mr. Van Worth. You're muted, Mr. Van Worth.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chase,
Yes,
Mr. O'Banion,
Yes.
Mr. Bonds? Yes, and
Yes.
Mrs. Davis, yes, and it passes.
Yes.
Nine, adoption COVID-19 mitigation plan policy updates. I need a motion and a second.
So
So
moved.
Moved by Mr. Bond, second by Mr. Van Worth. Dr. Miller.
So again, this is a board policy specifically for COVID-19, and it's basically mitigation.
Yes.
It's basically a mitigation plan for schools to implement in order to reopen schools and how to keep kids safe, and things that will be implemented during school closures and also while schools are open. So
You need to,
recommendation to approve.
you need to mute yourself, and you can just give me an up or down, because by the time I hear you say yes, like 5 other people.
Lord.
if we never have to have another Zoom meeting again, I'm happy.
Okay, thank
concur.
you. Thank you, Dr. Miller. If there's not any other questions, I'll call Ms. Baz. Yes. Mr. Mraz? Yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Arez?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? Okay, Mr. Bonds is a yes as well, and Mrs. Davis is a yes, and it passes. 9.9, open up supplemental curriculum. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second.
second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller.
This is a supplemental curriculum. I'm actually going to let Mr. Lopez talk about this. Lalo, can you come on real quick? Are you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is supplemental curriculum for the math department at the Bryan Middle School. So it is something that the teachers there identified to use in addition to CPM. It's a curriculum that was recommended by the math coach from the County Office of Ed as well. And we're using supplemental funds to pay for that. And the department chair there at the middle school is the one that made the recommendation along with the administrator.
Are there any questions? Okay, then we'll call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arez, Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion, Mr. Bonds, and myself is a yes, and it passes. 9.10, open up supplemental curriculum training and pacing guide alignment. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second.
second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller.
So with the curriculum, there needs to be training and a pacing guide calendar alignment training. So that it's just basically training that goes along with the curriculum. So it's kind of tied to the previous action item.
Okay, are there any other questions? Mr. Bonds?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Let me get through the voting for this one, and then we can take a 5-minute break.
9:30.
Okay, so 9.10, we are voting on open up supplemental curriculum training and pacing guide alignment. Call for the vote. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arez, Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion, Mr. Bonds, and Mrs. Davis is a yes as well, and it passes. And we're going to take a 5-minute break.
I don't even know how to turn it off.
Mr. Van Worth, just click on the start video, just click on it, and then it'll turn itself, it'll turn the video off.
Okay.
Page, if I stop video, would it do the same thing?
Yes, sir.
All righty.
Okay. 9.11 STEM Scopes Science Training for Curriculum Pilot. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Chase, second by Mr. Bonds. Dr. Miller.
I can cover that, board.
Okay, Mr. Lopez, thank you.
Yes, that's the STEM scope. It's a new adoption for the middle school, the science department. They identify that as one of the publishing companies that they want to pilot. So that's what that is for the middle school science department.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lopez. Are there any questions?
And this is just a pilot?
That is correct. So the team decided to use it this year and see if it meets their needs. It's one of the highest scoring materials of all the ones that they evaluated. So that's why they want to pilot and see if it is something they want to commit to in the long term.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Lopez? Okay, I'll call. Was there any other questions? I'm sorry. I'll call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Reyes? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? And Mrs. Davis is a yes, and it passes. 9.12, I Bailey non-audit services. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second.
second by Mr. Chase. Dr.
So I don't know if Ms. Kopinski wants to chime in a little bit, but I know this is basically a company that allows our business department transition. I know Ms. Kopinski is new to the district, and it's basically on a as-needed basis, correct, Ms. Kopinski?
That's correct. So Eide Bailey, while there are auditors, they offer non-audit financial services. They're kind of like fiscal counsel for the business department. So they're they provide services for questions with compliance and reporting and just other general health, fiscal health of the business department. So it would be used as an as-needed basis.
Okay, are there any questions for Dr. Miller or or Ms. Kopinski? No? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Reyes? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? And I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.13, borderland line-wise web filter. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Chase, second by Mr. Mraz. Dr. Miller?
Mr. Lee, I know it discussed a little bit. I know Mr. Lee could probably speak a little bit more intelligently on the topic than me, so I'll let him go.
I don't know about the intelligent part, but I could definitely speak on it. So basically, our securely Chromebook filter is coming up in August, and so we just definitely need to replace it. Borderland line-wise is basically cheaper and does more. And so if you'd like to move to that, with distance learning or regular in-person learning, you're gonna need to filter your Chromebooks and your student and staff devices, and that's what this device does. It makes us SIPA compliant, basically, so we can get E-rate or federal funding. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Lee? We'll call for the vote. Mr.
Yeah.
Bonds? Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Reyes? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? And I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.14, extra pay for extra duty, TK, kindergarten, guided reading training, Dos Palace Elementary. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. O'Banion, second by Mr. Mraz. Dr. Miller?
So guided reading, as you know, literacy is critical for students. And so this is basically a program that DPE has adopted. And it's basically a training program for guided reading. And so recommendation is to approve for training.
Are there any additional questions or comments for Dr. Miller? Okay, then I'll call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz? Mrs. Arias? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? Mr. O'Banion, thank you. And I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.15, extra pay for extra duty, TK2 pacing calendar, work with Goth Palace Elementary. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz, second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller.
So as you guys all know, over the last couple of years, been a lot of work done with benchmarks and also with pacing calendars. And so, but at the same time, this is something that needs to be continually refined. And so this is basically a little bit of extra time to continue to, adapt and provide support for students through the calendar work, pacing calendar work. So.
Any questions for Dr. Miller? Call for the vote. Mr. Vons. Mr. Mraz. Mrs. Arias. Mr. Chase. Mr. Van Worth.
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion. Mr. O'Banion. Thank you. And Mrs. Davis is a yes as well, and it passes. 9.16, push in contract and training for Bryant staff. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Chase, second by Mr. Bonds. Dr. Miller.
So our special education students, there's a need to provide them grade level access and to curriculum and instruction. And so this basically is a training for a push-in model to be able to allow some of our special education students to access the core curriculum like I previously mentioned. So basically training staff to be able to adapt and modify, not necessarily modify instruction, but being able to support special education students in the traditional classroom.
Are there any questions for Dr. Miller? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz? Mrs. Arias? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? And I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.17, extra pay for extra duty, special education, para training. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bonds, second by Mr. Mraz. Dr. Miller.
So as in previous communication with school board members, we talked about it earlier too, whether we do distance learning or in-person instruction. Now that the move has been to distance learning, this is basically a training for paraprofessionals of how to support students while they're not in school, technically while they're doing distance learning. So this will be an opportunity for staff development to take place, to be able to guide paraprofessionals in how they can better support students.
Are there any questions for Dr. Miller? Okay, let's call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz? Mrs. Arias? Mr. Chase, Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion. I'm a yes, and it passes. 9.18, prep buyout, extra pay for extra duty, Mitzi Gonzalez, Bryant Middle School. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Chase, second by Mrs. Davis. Dr. Miller?
This is basically a prep buyout based on scheduling for Bryant, for Mitzi Gonzalez. She's the ASB director there, and it would be basically a prep buyout. We are going to evaluate prep buyouts since there is distance learning taking place. And so this would be a situation if we were to return to school and there'd be a need for prep buyout. So it'll be something that we'll evaluate and discuss with the bargaining unit to be able to discuss what that prep buyout looks like, maybe during distance learning, whether it's needed or not needed during that time period.
Are there any additional questions for Dr. Miller? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Arias? Is a yes. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis is a yes as well, and it passes. 9.19, Dos Palace High School Coaches and Athletics Handbook. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. O'Banion.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mraz. Dr. Miller.
As previously discussed, this is the athletic handbook, and everything's pretty much the same as prior year and as the totality, but the change has been to the Dos Palace High School athletic contract. And so, as previously mentioned, the changes were basically adding in the ineligibility, but still allowing students the opportunity to participate in practice while they're ineligible. So that was added. And then also the 2 probationary periods prior to being deemed eligible, that was added. The other thing that was added, the panel that would evaluate when a student quits a sport, basically, evaluating the circumstances under when a student was quit a sport and how that was handled, basically a 3-person panel. Before it was the principal, the athletic director, and then that current coach. But we're basically removing the current coach and making it a counselor, the athletic director, and a principal, and that would be basically a third panel of 3 that were removed from the situation. And then basically the coach would submit a statement and the student would submit a statement, and then the panel would evaluate the information and make a determination. So that was on number 5 of the handbook. And then on B, where it talks about definition of non-privilege, there was a little bit of modification to, before it said, if you look at B, definition of non-privilege, and go down to I, before it said 1 to 2 day suspension will result in 2 weeks of non-privilege. Now it basically says, to be more explicit, it says 10 consecutive school days. And then 3 to 4 day suspension would be 15 consecutive days of non-privilege. And then a 5-day suspension would be 20 consecutive school days. And again, non-privilege is where students cannot participate in school activities, not just athletics, but it's FFA, it's school dances, it's anything associated with extracurricular activities. Students wouldn't be able to participate if they were on an out-of-school suspension based on those numbers. And then down at the bottom, it was a little bit more explicit. Before, we wanted to make sure that it was explicit that basically the school disciplinary policy supersedes all other policies, but there might be a particular coach or season of sport that might have overarching, or I wouldn't say overarching, but extended consequences for student behavior issues. And so that wouldn't necessarily take the place of what the district has for consequences for students that misbehave or whatever. But it could be on top of, like, for instance, there might be some kind of social media policy that a coach has. The student and parent would need to sign it. So there's just little different variations of coaches that have other policies that they would make students adhere to on top of what the district requires. So, and like I said, again, that was a little bit more explicit on the bottom piece. So,
Any questions or concerns?
Mr. O'Banion?
Mr. O'Banion?
I saw him raise his hand.
Mr. O'Banion, did you have something?
No, I was is this, are we wanting to revisit this?
Mr. Van Worth?
Oh.
I'm gonna make a statement because this is my own feelings about it. You know, I believe athletics, an athlete should be held to a higher standard than other students in school, in and out of school time. They represent the school, the team, the coach, and the town, and it's a privilege to be an athlete. It's not their right. And I really would like to see us as a board put something into that policy. It's a little tougher than that policy is now.
Is anything particular?
Particular?
Yeah, is there something particular that that you like to add?
Well, again, we've already tabled the other previous. Maybe we could table this one, and maybe this needs to be revisited also.
We can do that as well. Is there suggestions of how it can be improved?
Again, I have my theory. You know, I would like to see them fall under the policy if they get busted on the weekend for doing drugs or alcohol, and they fall under the school policy that we have right now set up 2, 4, and 6 weeks. I would not have a bit of a problem with that. I don't think we become cops and we don't go out and investigate and look for these things, but if they do it right in your face, you know, I think they need to be held accountable.
Okay, we can explore some maybe some just kind of code of conduct as far as how they should conduct themselves outside of school. But again, it's overarching, and it wouldn't be similar to all clubs and all programs at the school site, I would imagine. Whether it's, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the FFA contract, but and some of the other contracts that might be out there, I haven't necessarily reviewed all of them, but maybe it's an opportunity to basically review more of the contracts that are out there for athletics, and then compare it to what the FFA contract looks like and what other club contracts look like as well. And then maybe we can make a determination or something and revisit it.
Why do we care what the other clubs? And again, they're athletes. They're held to a higher standard. I mean, You know, it's,
Again, we've talked.
Understand why we get tied up.
I-
We have to treat every kid the same. You know, athletics is different.
I would want to hold all kids accountable the same and not differentiate between programs. That's the goal in all of this.
Legally,
and creating this athletic contract was, and that's before, I know that when we had this contract before, there was a lot of gray area in it. And so we wanted to have a standard for all kids, whether you're an athlete or FFA, and that's kind of what the discussion happened with the disciplinary committee is basically providing support and consequences for all kids, regardless of what extracurricular activity they participated in.
legally, can we hold athletes to a different standard that we hold other children's to? I mean,
technically you can. If we wanted to do that, we could. But again, I philosophically, I would struggle with it.
Mr. Banyan, you had your hand up next, and then Mr. Bonds. Mr. Banyan.
I'd like to amend my motion to table this.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Banyan has amended his motion to table this. Mr. Mraz, would you be in agreement with that?
it appears this topic needs more conversation and needs to be worked through, so yes.
Okay.
I still think
Mr.
there's some
Bonds?
board members that wanted to join in on this discussion, and maybe we ought to hear from them.
Mr. Bonds, would you like to say something?
That's what I was gonna suggest, that we table it, so.
Well, I mean, if we want to have a debate on it, we could do that. We'll table it for another time. It's just going to take a bit longer, and I think it's a good thing. We can debate it out in public, but we can table it for now, and we'll have us a lengthier debate here in the future in regards to this subject. Get it out there, and we'll try to come up with a good policy, and maybe get our athletic director and coaches involved in this one. They can give us some statements, some feedback, what they would like to see. Because in the end, it's their team. We have an athletic director. I would like to see what she has to say about it. She's there for a reason, you know.
Okay. Are there any other comments? I would just myself like to say these kids are all our kids, regardless of whether they're an athlete, a band member, an FFA member, a mock trial member. All of these kids, or a student for that matter, at Dos Palos High School, in one way or another, they represent us at Dos Palos High School. We need to set a bar for our kids to aspire to, and make it fair and equitable for all of them, that they are going to be held to a certain standard across the board, because they all represent Dos Palos High School in one way or the other. If there's no more comments, then we'll call for the vote on tabling this motion. Are there any more comments? Mr. Bonds? Mr. Mraz? Mrs. Arrayes? Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion? And I'm a yes as well, and we will table it. 9.20, junior varsity football assistant coach, Dos Palos High School, recommended candidate Lee Navarro. I need a motion and a second. Mr. O'Banion?
I'd like to take 9.20 to 9.37, all in one motion.
Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
There's been a motion and a second to take 9.20 junior varsity football assistant coach, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Lee Navarro. 9.21 boys varsity assistant basketball coach, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Titus Shields. 9.22 volunteer football coach, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate John Garcia. 9.23 English Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Misty Calvert. 9.24 Social Studies Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Kelly Soares. 9.25 Math Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Felix Engel. 9.26 CTE Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Jenny Hunger. 9.27 Agriculture Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Don Fry. 9.28 Spanish language class. I'm sorry, that one has been amended. And it is Chair, Diana Gomez. 9.29 Science Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Edwin Gibb. 9.30 Physical Education Department Chair, Dos Palace High School, recommended candidate Madison Pierce. 9.31 Multiple Subject Teacher, Bryant Middle School, recommended candidate Marco Magana. 9.32 Learning Director, Bryant Middle School, recommended candidate Carmen Paredes. 9.33 Transitional Kindergarten Grade Level Leader, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Michelle Ortiz. 9.34 Kindergarten Grade Level Leader, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Chantel LeBaire. 9.35 First Grade Level Leader, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Robin Pinto. 9.36 Second Grade Level Leader, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Shelley Walker. 9.37 Special Education Level Leader, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Priscilla Gomez. Are there any questions? Okay, then call for the vote. Mr. Bonds? Yes. Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Arrayes is a yes. Mr. Chase
Yes.
is a yes. Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. O'Banion?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. And those pass. 9.38 Resource Special Education Teacher, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Priscilla Gomez. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bonds, second by Mr. Van Worth. Dr. Miller?
So Mrs. Gomez was the SDC teacher at DPE, and now she's moving over to the resource position. And she was interviewed and hired for the position.
Are there any questions? Call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz?
Yes.
Mrs. Arrayes is a yes. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth?
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion is a yes, and I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.39 Special Education Teacher, Dos Palace Elementary School, recommended candidate Shelley Stover. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz. Second by Mrs. Davis. Dr. Miller?
So the position that Mrs. Gomez vacated, we posted the position and went through interviews, and the successful candidate was Mrs. Stover. And so Mrs. Stover will be new to the district.
Are there any questions for Dr. Miller? Okay, let's call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Reyes is a yes. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth. You're muted, Mr. Van Worth. Was that yes, Mr. Van Worth?
Had the
Thank
thumbs
you.
up.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Banion is a yes. I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.40, Dos Palace High School Curriculum and Instructional Material Adoption, Physics in the Universe. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz,
Second.
second by Mr. Chase. Dr. Miller.
This is the a curriculum that's been evaluated, adopted by Dos Palace High School Science Department. There's been a lot of work done as far as evaluating curriculum and trying to move our curriculum to the next generation science standard. And this is basically the adopted curriculum that they'd like to move forward with.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Miller. Are there any questions? Call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz
Yes.
Reyes is a yes. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion is a yes. I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 9.41, Dos Palace High School Curriculum and Instructional Materials Adoption, Biology, Science, Dimensions, California Living Earth 2020 Hybrid. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz. Second, Mrs. Davis. Dr. Miller.
Similar to the last action item. The last action item was physics, and this would be the adoption for biology at Dos Palace High School, and it's again aligned to the next generation science standard.
Okay, any questions? Call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Reyes is a yes. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion is a yes, and Mrs. Davis is a yes, and it passes. 9.42, Dos Palace High School Curriculum and Instructional Materials Adoption, Chemistry, Science Dimensions, California in Earth Systems 2020 Hybrid. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mraz. Second by Mr. Van Worth. Dr. Miller.
Similar to this would be the chemistry adoption. And like I said, again, it's all been evaluated by the science department at Dos Palace High School. And this is the curriculum they'd like to move forward with. So.
Are there any questions? Call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz is a yes. Mrs. Reyes is a yes. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth,
Yes.
Mr. O'Banion is a yes. I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 10.1, resignations and retirements, informational item. Dr. Miller.
Did you forget 9.43?
Yeah. There's a mitigation thing for that.
Learning loss mitigation, 9.43.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can find it because my copy does not have it.
you for this opportunity.
Dr. Miller, can you read item 9.43, please?
Yeah, 9.43 is COVID-19 learning loss mitigation funds.
So
We need
moved.
a motion. Moved by Mr. Chase,
Second.
second by Mr. Mraz. Dr. Miller.
So the learning loss mitigation funds is basically state allocated monies that are allocated to districts for to mitigate the learning loss of students while they're on distance learning. And so the goal that that we have, Mrs. Grijalva set up some trainings in late July to be able to train staff and to kind of, like I said, again, train staff for distance learning and other staff development opportunities that they have created in the Educational Services Department. So, and it's basically to recoup learning loss. And again, it's not necessarily extra money, it's basically allocated money specifically for COVID-19.
Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, let's call for the vote. Mr. Bonds is a yes. Mr. Mraz,
Yes.
Mrs. Arias is a yes. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Van Worth. You're on mute, Mr. Van Worth. Mr. Van Worth is a yes. Mr. O'Banion is a yes. And I'm a yes as well, and it passes. 10.1 resignations, retirements, Dr. Miller.
I'd just like again to thank the service that the 3 employees who resigned, Mrs. Davis, Mr. Herr, and also I believe it was Mr. Carl Lopez that served the district. Like I said, Mrs. Lopez was here, or excuse me, Mrs. Gomez was here for a short time period. But all of them gave great service to students and did a great job for the district, and we'd like to thank them for their years of service.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Written reports, 11.1 preschool, Virginia Franco, 11.2 technology, Paget Lee, 11.3 food services, Rhonda Sullivan, 11.4 health services, Priscilla Whitaker, 11.5 maintenance, operations, and transportations, Matthew McCulloch, 11.6 special education, Laura Delmas, 11.7 educational and personnel services, Lalo Lopez. Are there any questions? Okay. 12.1 fiscal cash status update presented by Melissa Kilpinski, Assistant Superintendent of Business Services.
Ajay, may I share my screen?
Yes, Ms. Kapinski, I gave you the host, right? So you can, yeah, just click on the share and then you could just select which files you want to share.
Okay, that would be this one. Share. Is it there?
Yes.
You all see it? Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I moved it off of my screen. Sorry about that. Okay, so I have here for your review the cash flow updated through June 30th. It reflects that deferral that we had of our P2 state aid in June, which was deferred till through July, but it shows there in that accruals column. And this deferral is ongoing. It is part of the Budget Act that was passed by the governor. And so we will see this again happen next June to July. So the report shows that in the month of June, our expenses exceeded our revenue for that month by $1.7 million. And so our ending cash on June 30th, at the bottom of that column that says titled June, was $6,613,482. So we're now in the process of closing the books for the 1920, and so you see the amounts in the accruals in the adjustment column. And at this point, as they are estimates, they are very close to what I expect to close the books with. And when we apply these adjustments, the ending cash, or what we call the fund balance, does show $673,170. So I'd also though like to bring your attention to the other summary. So if I do this, do you now see our 3-year cash snapshot?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as we travel through the impact of cash deferrals due to the COVID-19, we will want to be looking at our cash and not just the current year, but the second and third year out, because next year, or this current year, the 2021 year, we have many more deferrals of cash. And so this snapshot shows the impact of the $5.8 million deferrals that will be in place this year. And these are also established by law and will be ongoing. So the February deferral is deferred to November, and that's in the 21-22 fiscal year. In March to October, there's one in April that is deferred to September, May to August, and again June to July. Altogether, we receive approximately 30% less cash this year. So being in a place that has cash is great, but we also want to be responsible with our thoughts for spending and managing the cash. And I will be doing that on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And it's great that it's reported to you as the board on a monthly basis so that you can continue to be updated. We districts that need to borrow cash have the opportunity to borrow cash because we cannot pay our payroll if there's not cash in the bank. So that will be definitely something that we have to continue to monitor. But as we look at it on using that 3-year cash snapshot, that will be our best tool to manage that. Any questions?
It's really important to point out that the deferrals, as you guys know, it helps to how Mrs. Kilpinski mentioned, it helps to have the cash, and then the cash eventually comes. But there's times where there's just, like I said again, deferrals, and you don't get the money you're supposed to get. But it all comes, but it just gets deferred out. And so having cash during that time period and having the reserve that we have and fiscally responsible, that the status that we're in right now really helps us in comparison to other districts that are not as fortunate as we are. So.
Are there any questions or any more comments? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Kilpinski.
You're welcome.
12.2 Superintendent's Report.
I just wanted to give a brief update on the tank at DPE. There's Mr. McCulloch has got a company to come out, and they're experts basically at removing underground tanks. And so basically what they're going to do is remove the tank potentially next week, and then they need to begin to do soil samples. And based on the soil samples, we'll kind of basically determine how in depth the excavation will need to be. And so we won't have a final info, or basically a report on that until the fall, hopefully the following week, again after the tank gets removed. And so that'll be a process. But again, the company that we're using, that's their specialty, is removing underground tanks. So so anyway, that'll be a process, and Mr. McCulloch is on top of it. Students and staff can still enter the school site. It's just they need to basically stay away from, because right now Mr. McCulloch has it fenced off, has a temporary fence around the area where the tank is at, and they would just need to stay outside of the fence right now. So until it gets excavated and replaced. So, but it'll be a process, and again, we'll have the EPA and follow all the government agency recommendations through that process. So then also, go ahead.
Is there any more discussion on who's
who? Say it again.
What else were you gonna say, Dr. Miller?
Go ahead. I think Mr. Van Worth, I think you're on now again. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, is there any discussion about whose financial responsibility that's going to be? Did we ever talk to insurance or the solar people, or where's that at?
So basically the responsibility, there's, like I said, part of the company that's coming out, it's an investigation. And so basically they look at the damage that the solar company did, and then also what was already damaged. And they basically assess that, and then what contamination took place based on the damage done by the solar company, and then the contamination that may have already been there prior to. And so, you know, there's that piece of it. And there'll be a report that kind of dictates that. But again, it's there was a valve cover, or excuse me, a valve cover above the tank, and that basically moves liability over to the solar company. And so there'll be maybe some things like, again, that the tank removal itself will be up to the district. And I would imagine, like I said, there'll be some insurance support there. But like I said, we'll need to research that. Like I said, the final report's just not out yet. And as soon as we get that, it'll dictate a lot of that. But there's a lot of it has to do with, like I said, again, the valve cover was there. So that basically removes a lot of the liability from the district. But again, there might be potential leaking prior to the solar company hitting the tank. So again, there'll need to be a report for that. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I'd also like to mention that the construction has started for the artificial turf and all-weather track at Dos Palace High School, which is good news. I'm really excited about that. They're prepping the field for lime treatment, and things are underway there. And so in a few months, we will have a brand new field with artificial turf and all-weather track for our kids. And as soon as sports get reinstated and band gets reinstated, I know they shut band down also. As soon as our programs are up and running again, we're going to have a fantastic place for our kids to run around and participate in programs and do fantastic things and grow, not just academically, but as people on the soccer field, on the football field, on the graduation field, and also the track field, and then, like I said, again, the band. So it'll be exciting to see all that when it comes together. We just need to stomp out COVID-19. That's the goal. So.
Thank you, Dr.
That's
Miller.
all I had.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. 12.2, 12.3, report from board members. Mr. Bonds. Mr. Bonds has nothing. Mr. Mraz.
Nothing, just as I said, we're kind of on the COVID thing, returning back to school. it is what it is. And hopefully, like I said, we'll get this beat, we'll evaluate and get our kids back to school when it's safe. And get them back as soon as possible.
Mrs. Arias? Okay. Mrs. Arias has nothing. Mr. Chase?
Just brief, I mean, people have to understand that, you know, the decision we make is not taken lightly by anybody here, regarding, you know, where our students learn or how they learn. That's what we're here for. And I think we're given a very bad situation, and we're trying to make the best of it. And we're trying to, you know, we're given three horrible choices to make, you know, and I know that there's going to be people in the community that, you know, want to go one way or the other way, and they think, oh, we need to all open up, or we need to all close down. A lot of this has been taken out of our hands. But what they need to also know is, regardless of what the decision is, if you've got disagreement or whatever, that's fine. But at this point, try with it for your kids' sake, make things positive. If you don't like the distance learning, okay, but do your best, make it positive. If you don't like, you know, if you think we should be in class, still try to do your best. Keep the disagreement out of your child's ears, you know, talk amongst yourselves or whatever, but be positive for the kids. They need all the positivity they can get, because they're not getting much these days, you know. So that's my message out.
Thank you, Mr. Chase. Mr. Van Worth?
Well, that was well said, Jeff. And I think I've talked enough tonight, so I got nothing.
Okay. Mr.
You can
O'Banion?
talk.
Mr. O'Banion?
Can you hear me? Unbelievable.
Somewhat. Go ahead and try, please.
No.
Mr. O'Banion? It's late, and if you guys are still out watching on YouTube, I'm sure you're all very tired, as are we. We don't take this decision lightly, and there is probably 50% of you that are comfortable and are happy about the decision that we made tonight. There's probably 50% of you that are completely unhappy with the decision that we made tonight. We have struggled tonight ourselves with Zoom. We have not mastered Zoom as adults. We know that Zoom is difficult, and we're adults, and can't imagine how difficult and frustrating it is for our kids and their parents, because it's frustrating for us as well. But as Mr. Chase said, and as Dr. Miller and Mr. Lopez have said, the decision truly has been taken out of our hands with what we presented to you tonight. We had an A plan and a B plan and a C plan, if you would. A being full return to school, B being a hybrid model, and C being full distance learning. We had a plan for all three. But today and yesterday, as this continues to evolve, the health department has come to us and said, your plan A is no longer an option. Your plan B is no longer an option. The decision we made tonight, going to full distance learning, knowing how difficult that is for your children, is difficult for us as well, but we need to get moving with a plan so that we can do the best we can by our students. And we all don't agree. We don't agree that we don't agree about the politics. We don't agree about the tests. We don't agree about the numbers. We all don't agree. The only thing that we all do agree on is that we need to try to do what's best for our students and our staff at Dos Palace Joint Union, Dos Palace or Loma, Bryant. It's all about your kids, but we can't do good things for your kids if their teachers are sick. So all I'm doing is asking you to remember, and you've heard me say this several times before, we are stronger together. We can get through this together, and we will do everything we can to make sure that we provide the most positive learning experience for your kids. Please just work with us, be patient, and we are stronger together. 13.1, requests from board members for future agenda items. Mr. Bonds. Mr. Bonds has nothing. Mr. Mraz. Mr. Mraz has nothing. Mrs. Arias. Mrs. Arias has nothing. Mr. Chase. Mr. Chase has nothing. Mr. Van Worth. You're on mute, Van Worth.
Nothing.
Nothing. Mr. O'Banion. Mr. O'Banion has nothing as well. 14.1, adjourn meeting. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Chase, second by Mr. O'Banion. Call for the vote. Mr. Bonds.
Yes.
Mr. Mraz.
It's unanimous.
It's unanimous.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Get me
everyone.
off of this
Good night,
thing.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.